Please, sir, it's raining and we have nowhere to go tonight.
I don't know you girls, but all right, just for tonight.
Some stories don't just entertain, they change the way you feel, think, and see life. Welcome to ZZ Stories.
Poor single dad took in strange twin girls and their dog for one night, unaware their dad is a millionaire. To the single parent listening right now, before we continue, let this remind you, you are not failing. You are fighting, and your child is lucky to have you. And for my lovely viewers, your kindness, your time, your quiet strength, it all matters here. You're part of this story too. The knock came just as lightning split the night sky in half. Lucian Sullivan froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. Nobody came up this mountain road, ever. Especially not at 10 o'clock on a night when the Colorado storm was unleashing its fury with the kind of violence that made even seasoned mountain dwellers nervous. Another knock, more urgent this time. He set down his mug and approached the heavy wooden door of his cabin, every instinct screaming at him to pretend he wasn't home. 5 years of self-imposed isolation had taught him that visitors brought complications, and complications brought pain. But the knocking came again, desperate now, accompanied by what sounded like crying. Against his better judgment, Lucian opened the door. 2 young women stood on his porch, soaked to their skin and shivering violently. One of them cradled a golden retriever in her arms, the dog's fur matted and dripping. Both girls looked to be in their early 20s, with delicate features and blonde hair plastered to their heads. Their designer hiking clothes, now transparent from the rain, told him they weren't local. "Please," the one holding the dog gasped through chattering teeth. "We're lost. We've been walking for hours." Lucian stared at them, his mind racing. The rational part of him, the part that had learned to protect himself from any form of human connection, wanted to give them directions to town and send them on their way. But the other part, the part he tried so hard to bury, remembered what it felt like to be lost and desperate. "How did you find this place?" he asked, not moving from the doorway. "We saw your light," the second girl said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We've been walking since our dog ran off this afternoon. The trail just disappeared." Lightning illuminated their faces for a split second, and Lucian saw something that made his chest tighten. Fear. Real, bone-deep terror that came from being completely at the mercy of nature's fury. He'd felt that fear before. Different circumstances, but the same desperate helplessness. "Come in," he heard himself say, stepping aside. "Quickly, before you catch pneumonia." The girls stumbled inside, bringing with them the smell of rain and pine. The dog immediately began exploring Lucian's sparse living room, shaking water all over his worn wooden floors. "Thank you," the girl with the brighter blue eyes said, her relief palpable. "I'm Ariana. This is my sister Annabelle, and that's Rusty." "Lucian," he replied simply, already moving toward his bedroom. He paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. "I'll get you some dry clothes." As he rummaged through his dresser, Lucian's fingers found the soft flannel shirts and warm sweats he'd been avoiding for years. Rebecca's clothes. He packed them into an old duffel when he left Denver, unable to leave them behind in the house they'd once filled with laughter. They'd been sitting in his dresser for years now, untouched. A reminder of everything the fire had taken and everything he couldn't let go of. Now, for the first time since the fire, they might actually serve a purpose. He returned to find both girls standing by his fireplace, their arms wrapped around themselves as they tried to absorb what little heat the dying embers provided. "Here," he said, handing them the clothes. "You can change in the bedroom. I'll build up the fire and make some coffee." When they emerged 15 minutes later, swimming in his oversized clothes, Lucian felt something crack open in his chest. They looked so young, so vulnerable. Annabelle had pulled her wet hair back into a messy bun, while Ariana had simply let hers fall in damp waves around her shoulders. Both wore his clothes like oversized pajamas, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. "Better?" he asked, pouring steaming coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. "Much," Annabelle said softly, accepting the coffee with both hands. "We can't thank you enough. We didn't know what we were going to do." Lucian settled into his favorite armchair, the one facing away from the empty spaces where other furniture used to be, and studied his unexpected guests. "What were you doing up here in the first place? This isn't exactly a popular hiking destination." The sisters exchanged a look that didn't go unnoticed. There was something there, some shared understanding that went deeper than sibling connection. "We come up here every year," Ariana said carefully. "It's a memorial of sorts." Lucian's grip tightened on his coffee mug. He knew about memorials, about the desperate need to return to places that held pieces of people you'd lost.
We were supposed to be back at the trailhead by sunset, but Rusty saw a rabbit and bolted. By the time we found him, the storm had started and we couldn't find our way back. As if summoned by his name, Rusty padded over to Lucien and rested his head on the man's knee. The gesture was so simple, so trusting, that Lucien felt his throat tighten. When was the last time any living thing had sought comfort from him?
He likes you, Ariana observed, a small smile playing at her lips. Dogs are good judges of character, Lucien said, his hand automatically moving to scratch behind Rusty's ears. The motion felt foreign after years of avoiding even this small form of connection. The storm raged outside, rattling the cabin's windows with each gust of wind. Inside, the fire crackled back to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For the first time in 5 years, Lucien's home felt occupied. "This is a beautiful place," Annabelle said, looking around at the sparse but well-crafted furniture. "Did you build all of this?" Lucien nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. "Helps pass the time." "More than that," Ariana said, standing to examine a small wooden carving on the mantel. It was a robin, its wings captured mid-flight. "This is incredible craftsmanship. You're an artist." Heat rose in Lucien's cheeks. When was the last time someone had complimented his work? When was the last time he cared about anyone's opinion? "Just a hobby," he mumbled. "Don't downplay your talent," Ariana said firmly. "I know art when I see it. My father," she paused, seeming to catch herself. "My father appreciates fine craftsmanship. This would impress him." Another loaded pause, another careful omission. These girls were holding back something significant, but Lucien didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, especially in these mountains.
The conversation flowed easier than it should have between strangers. Annabelle had a gentle humor, finding joy in small things. The way Rusty's tail created a rhythm against the wooden floor, the satisfied sighs they all made after drinking Lucien's surprisingly good coffee. Ariana was more observant, asking thoughtful questions about his tools, his techniques, the inspiration behind his carvings. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, settling cross-legged on the floor near the fire. 5 years, Lucien said, then immediately regretted the honesty. That number opened doors to questions he wasn't ready to answer. "You must love the solitude," Annabelle said gently. "Sometimes," Lucien replied, "but lonely and alone are different things. Sometimes alone is safer." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Both girls looked at him with new understanding, and Lucien realized he'd revealed more in that single sentence than he had in years of conversations with the few townspeople who still tried to engage him. "Safer from what?" Ariana asked softly. Lucien was quiet for so long that the question seemed to fade into the crackling of the fire. Finally, he spoke. "From caring too much, from having something to lose." The honesty surprised him. He'd spent 5 years perfecting the art of deflection, of keeping conversations surface level and forgettable. But something about these girls, their own careful omissions perhaps, or the way they didn't push for details, made him feel like maybe, for once, the truth wouldn't be used against him.
As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be gaining strength, each thunderclap shaking the cabin's foundation. "Looks like you're stuck here for the night," Lucien said, glancing toward the windows where lightning continued to strobe. "The mountain roads will be impassable until this passes." "We don't want to impose," Annabelle said quickly. "You're not," Lucien replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "I've got sleeping bags you can use. The couch pulls out into a bed. What about you?" Ariana asked. "We don't want to kick you out of your own bed." "I don't sleep much anyway," Lucien said, which was true. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant reliving the fire over and over again. It wasn't entirely honest. He had a bed here in the cabin, but he rarely used it. Beds reminded him too much of their old home in Denver, of nights lying beside Rebecca, whispering about their plans, their hopes, and Tommy's latest adorable mispronunciation. That bedroom had burned away with them, but the memories followed him here. Sleeping in a bed now felt like opening a door he wasn't ready to walk through. The girls settled in with an ease that spoke of siblings who'd shared close quarters before. Rusty claimed the spot in front of the fire, his contented sighs mixing with the storm's fury outside. But sleep didn't come easily for any of them. Around 2 a.m, Lucien heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Ariana standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. "Can't sleep either?" he asked quietly, not wanting to wake Annabelle. "Too much on my mind," Ariana replied, her voice barely above a whisper.
Lucien joined her at the window. The storm was still raging, but something about sharing the sleepless vigil made it feel less threatening. "What brought you up here?" he asked. "Really?" Ariana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old grief. "Our mother used to bring us here, before she died." She paused, her breath fogging the glass. "She said mountains had a way of putting problems in perspective,
making you realize how small your troubles really are in the grand scheme of things. Lucian understood. He'd come to these same mountains for similar reasons, though his perspective had been less about finding peace and more about disappearing entirely. How long ago? He asked. 3 years. Cancer. Oriana's reflection wavered in the window. Dad's never been the same. Neither have we, really. This trip, it's our way of staying connected to her memory. The confession hung between them, fragile and honest. Lucian felt the familiar ache of recognition, the way loss carved permanent spaces in your chest that nothing could ever fill. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. What about you? Oriana asked, turning to face him. What made you choose this place? For a moment, Lucian considered deflecting again, but something about the darkness, the storm, the way grief had already been acknowledged between them, made the truth feel less dangerous. I used to live in Denver, had a family. There was a fire at the warehouse where I worked. Rebecca and Tommy had come by to surprise me with dinner. Rebecca was carrying the food. Tommy was clutching one of his toy trucks. The fire started so fast the smoke hit us before I even smelled it. A beam fell near the entrance, pinning Rebecca's leg. I got her free and pushed her toward the exit, yelling for her to get outside while I went back for Tommy. But before I could reach him, the ceiling gave way. He swallowed hard. The firefighters pulled me out, but Tommy was only 3. Oh, Lucian, Oriana whispered. Everyone said it wasn't my fault, that I was a hero for trying, but heroes don't let their children die while they survive. Lucian's voice cracked. I came here because I didn't deserve to keep living the life they couldn't have.
Ariana's hand found his arm, her touch light but warm. That's not true, isn't it? Lucian looked at her reflection in the window. I had one job as a father, and I failed. You didn't fail. You tried to save them both. That's not failure. That's love. The simplicity of her words hit him like a physical blow. For 5 years, he'd been so focused on his guilt, his perceived failure, that he'd forgotten the love that had driven him back into those flames. They stood in silence as the storm raged outside, 2 people who understood that loss wasn't something you got over, it was something you learned to carry. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling with raindrops. But the mountain roads were still treacherous, streams swollen with runoff and debris scattered across the pathways. Looks like you're stuck with us for another day, Annabelle said cheerfully, peering out at the soggy landscape. Lucian should have minded. For 5 years he'd carefully constructed a life of solitude, of routine without surprise. But as he watched Annabelle coax Rusty into eating from a makeshift bowl, while Ariana studied his woodworking tools with genuine fascination, he realized he didn't mind at all. In fact, the prospect of returning to silence felt oddly empty. Do you mind if I try? Ariana asked, holding up a piece of sandpaper. Try what? Helping. I've always been good with my hands, and I'd like to learn. Lucian hesitated. His workshop had been his sanctuary, the one place where he could lose himself in the meditative rhythm of creation. But something about Ariana's genuine interest, the way she handled his tools with respect, rather than casual curiosity, made him nod. Start with this piece, he said, handing her a rough-cut bird similar to the robin she'd admired. Long, smooth strokes. Let the wood tell you where it wants to be shaped. As they worked side by side, Lucian found himself stealing glances at Ariana's face. She had a small line of concentration between her eyebrows, and she bit her lower lip when focusing on particularly intricate work. Her hands moved with surprising confidence, as if she had been waiting her whole life to try this. You're a natural, he said, after she had successfully smoothed the bird's wing to perfect curves. I've always loved working with my hands, she replied, not looking up from her work. Dad wanted me to go into business, follow in his footsteps, but I've always been drawn to creating things, making something beautiful from raw materials. Another careful omission about her father. Another hint that there was more to their story than simple memorial hikes. Meanwhile, Annabelle had taken over the kitchen with an efficiency that spoke of someone accustomed to making the best of limited resources. She'd somehow transformed Lucian's meager supplies, canned soup, dried pasta, some vegetables that were just shy of going bad, into something that actually smelled appetizing. You don't have to cook, Lucian protested. I want to, Annabelle replied firmly. It's the least we can do. Besides, I like cooking. It makes me feel useful. As the day progressed, something unexpected happened. The cabin, which had felt like a tomb for 5 years, began to feel like a home again. Annabelle's gentle humming filled the kitchen. Ariana's questions about woodworking techniques sparked conversations Lucian hadn't realized he'd been hungry for. Even Rusty seemed to sense the change, no longer the anxious lost dog from the night before, but a contented companion sprawled by the fire.
That evening, as they shared Annabelle's surprisingly delicious pasta, Ariana looked directly at Lucian and said something that stopped his heart. Thank you for saving us. I just gave you shelter, Lucian protested. Anyone would have done the same. No, Annabelle said quietly. Not anyone. And not just anyone would have made us feel so welcome. so safe. Lucian felt that crack in his chest widen. These girls weren't just grateful for shelter. They were grateful for kindness, for being treated like people rather than burdens. What did that say about their lives, their experiences? You saved us too, Ariana added softly. I don't understand. This trip, Ariana exchanged a look with her sister. We were running away, not from anything dangerous, just from expectations, pressure, the feeling that we were disappointing everyone by not being who they wanted us to be. And then we got lost, really lost, and scared. And just when we thought we'd made the worst mistake of our lives, we found you, or you found us. Either way, Ariana said, you reminded us that there are still good people in the world, people who help strangers without asking for anything in return. Lucian stared into his coffee mug, overwhelmed by emotions he thought were dead. When had he become someone who inspired gratitude instead of pity? When had helping others stopped feeling like a betrayal of his lost family?
On the third morning, the sun emerged bright and clear, the mountain roads finally passable. The time had come for goodbyes. As Ariana and Annabelle gathered their now dry clothes and prepared Rusty for the hike back to their car, Lucian felt a strange reluctance settle in his chest. The cabin would feel smaller without their presence, quieter without Annabelle's humming or Ariana's thoughtful questions. Thank you, Annabelle said, hugging him with the unconscious affection of someone who saw hugs as natural expressions of gratitude. For everything. Take care of yourself, Lucian replied, meaning it more than any goodbye he'd spoken in years. But Ariana lingered, her expression uncertain. What if we didn't want to leave just yet? Ariana asked suddenly. Lucian blinked. The roads are clear, you can get home now. But what if we wanted to stay a little longer? Annabelle added, her voice soft but determined. We could help with projects around here, keep you company. The offer hit Lucian like a physical blow. Company meant attachment. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of loss all over again. You have lives to get back to, he said carefully. School, family. Our father thinks we're on vacation anyway. We told him we'd be gone for a week. We've only been here 3 days. Lucian looked at them, really looked at them, and saw something that made his breath catch. They weren't asking out of pity or obligation. There was something genuine in their expressions, something that looked remarkably like affection. I'm not good company, he warned them. I'm broken, in ways you can't see. We all are, a little. Maybe that's okay. Sometimes the most unexpected connections happen when we're not looking for them. Have you ever found something beautiful in the most unlikely place? These moments of serendipity can completely change the course of our lives. Share your story in the comments below. So, they stayed. 4 more days that passed like a dream Lucian was afraid to wake up from.
They fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings were spent working, Lucian on his carvings, Ariana learning techniques with surprising aptitude, Annabelle exploring the surrounding forest or reading books from Lucian's small collection. Afternoons involved collaborative projects around the cabin, fixing loose boards, organizing his workshop, preparing meals together. But it was the evenings that Lucian treasured most. As they sat by the fire sharing stories and comfortable silences, Lucian began to notice things about Ariana that made his pulse quicken in ways he'd forgotten were possible. The way she concentrated when learning a new woodworking technique, her tongue poking out slightly in focus. The way she listened, really listened when he talked about his craft, asking questions that showed she cared about the answers. The way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, with something that looked remarkably like affection. It was impossible, of course. She was 23, beautiful, clearly from a world of privilege and opportunity despite her careful omissions about her background. He was a broken-down carpenter hiding from his past in the mountains, carrying guilt that would probably never fully heal. But there was something building between them, something neither acknowledged but both felt. On their 6th night together, as Annabelle slept and Rusty snored by the dying fire, Ariana and Lucian found themselves alone on the cabin's small porch, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. I don't want to go back, she said quietly. You have to, Lucian replied, though the words tasted like ash. This isn't real life. This is just a break from reality. What if I don't want reality? Ariana turned to face him. What if I want this? Lucian's heart hammered against his ribs. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know me. Not really. I know you're kind. I know you're talented. I know you make me feel safe in a way I've never felt before. She paused, then added softly, I know you've been hurt badly, and I know you're afraid of being hurt again. Lucian closed his eyes. She was so young, so full of possibility. What right did he have to even consider? Age is just a number, Ariana said as if reading his thoughts. And I'm not asking you to make any promises. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, sometimes, good things can come from unexpected places.
Ariana, I see how you look at me, she continued, her voice barely above whisper. I see it because I look at you the same way. This thing between us, it's real. Maybe it's complicated. Maybe it's impractical. Maybe it doesn't make sense on paper. But it's real. Lucian opened his eyes and found her staring at him with an intensity that took his breath away. In her face, he saw hope and fear warring for dominance. Hope that he might feel the same way. Fear that he'd reject her. You're 23, he said weakly. So? You're 29. 6 years isn't exactly scandalous. It's not just age, it's everything else. He gestured vaguely, encompassing her obvious education, her refined speech patterns, her casual mentions of international travel. You're from a different world. Maybe, Ariana admitted, but maybe different worlds colliding is exactly what we both need. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Lucian wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to tell her that he felt it too, this connection that defied logic and experience. But fear held him back, the same fear that had driven him to these mountains in the first place. What if he cared for her, and lost her too? What if this fragile, impossible thing between them crumbled under the weight of real-world pressures? What if he wasn't enough, again? I need time, he said finally. Ariana nodded, understanding without him having to explain. I know, I'm not going anywhere. But of course she was. The next morning, as planned, she and Annabelle packed their belongings and prepared to return to whatever life waited for them beyond these mountains. As they stood by the door, ready to leave, Ariana pressed a small piece of paper into Lucian's hand. My phone number, in case you ever decide you don't want to be alone anymore. Lucian watched their rental car disappear down the mountain road and felt the cabin close in around him like a tomb. But this time, the silence felt different, not peaceful, empty. He'd gotten used to Annabelle's humming while she cooked, to the sound of Rusty's tail thumping against the floor, and to Ariana's soft breathing as she worked beside him. For 3 weeks, he stared at that piece of paper. He told himself all the reasons calling would be a mistake. The age difference, the class difference, which was becoming more apparent the more he thought about their expensive gear and casual references to international travel. The fact that he was damaged goods, carrying trauma that would inevitably poison anything good in his life. But late at night, when the mountain wind howled through the pines and the cabin felt like a coffin, he found himself imagining what it would be like to hear her voice again, to see her smile, to feel, for just a moment, like he might deserve happiness. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening, when the loneliness felt like it might swallow him whole. Lucian had been staring at his latest carving, a pair of birds in flight, their wings touching, when he realized he'd unconsciously carved Ariana's face into the female bird's features. That's when he knew he was already lost. His hands shook as he dialed the number. Ariana? Lucian. Her voice was breathless with surprise and something that sounded like relief. I was thinking, maybe I don't want to be alone anymore. Where are you right now? Ariana asked. Home. The cabin. Don't move. We're coming to you. We? Annabelle and I. And Lucian? There's someone we'd like you to meet. 2 days later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to Lucian's cabin, its polished surface reflecting the mountain scenery like a mirror. Lucian's stomach dropped as he watched 3 figures emerge from the vehicle. Ariana and Annabelle looked exactly as he remembered, but the third figure, a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Lucian made in 6 months, was clearly not just another hiker. This was it. The moment reality crashed back in, reminding him of all the reasons this could never work. Lucian, Ariana said, practically bouncing with nervous energy, I'd like you to meet our father. Dad, this is Lucian Sullivan.
Lucian shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and, surprisingly, calloused palms. Not the soft hands of someone who never worked a day in his life. They said you saved them, Roderick continued, his voice carrying a slight accent that Lucian couldn't place. That you opened your home to strangers and asked for nothing in return. Anyone would have done the same, Lucian mumbled, the same deflection he'd used with the girls. No, Roderick said, his voice firm. They wouldn't have, and from what I understand, you did more than provide shelter. You gave them something they've been missing since their mother passed, a sense of family. Lucian's eyes widened. So Roderick knew about the conversations, the connection that had formed between them. Instead of anger or disapproval, there was something that looked like gratitude. I know my daughter cares for you, Roderick continued, glancing at Ariana with obvious affection. And I know you care for her. I also know you think the differences between your worlds make it impossible.
Lucian started to speak, but Roderick held up a hand. I was born in a small town in Romania, came to America with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work harder than everyone around me, built my business from the ground up, one custom piece of furniture at a time. Furniture. That explained Ariana's knowledge of craftsmanship, her appreciation for his work. Money doesn't change who you are at heart. It just gives you more options. And right now, I'm offering you one. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Ashford Custom Furnishings. I own a chain of high-end furniture stores across the West Coast. The girls showed me photos of your work. He handed Lucian the card. I could use someone with your talent. Lucian stared at the elegant business card, his mind reeling. I don't understand. I'm offering you a job, a real job, with benefits and a future. You could have your own workshop, design and build custom pieces for clients who appreciate true craftsmanship. Eventually, maybe even open your own store. Roderick's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to buy my daughter's happiness, Mr. Sullivan. I'm just trying to remove the obstacles to it. What would you do if someone offered you a chance to completely rebuild your life? Would you take it? Sometimes opportunities come disguised as impossible coincidences. Let me know what you think in the comments.
Lucian looked at Ariana, who was watching him with hope and fear warring in her eyes. Behind her, Annabelle offered an encouraging smile. What if I'm not ready for this? What if I'm too broken to be what she deserves? Lucian asked. Then we'll figure it out together, Ariana said simply. All of us. That's what families do. Family. The word hit Lucian like a physical blow. For 5 years, he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve another family, that wanting one was a betrayal of the family he'd lost. But looking at these people, Roderick with his quiet strength and unexpected understanding, Annabelle with her gentle kindness, and Ariana with her fierce, determined love, Lucian felt something he'd thought had died in that warehouse fire 5 years ago. Hope. I have conditions, he said finally, his voice stronger than it had been in years. Roderick raised an eyebrow. Such as? I want to earn my place. I won't take charity, and I won't let anyone think I'm using your daughter to get ahead. Fair enough. I want to take things slow with Ariana. We need time to figure out what this is, without pressure or expectations. Also fair. Lucian took a deep breath. And I want to tell you about the fire, about my wife and son. You deserve to know who your daughter is getting involved with. Roderick nodded solemnly. When you're ready. Lucian looked at the business card in his hand, then at the faces surrounding him. For the first time in 5 years, the future didn't look like an endless void of guilt and solitude. It looked like possibility. Okay, he said simply. Ariana's smile could have powered the entire mountain.
8 months later, Lucian stood in his new workshop in Denver, putting the finishing touches on a dining room table that would sell for more than he used to make in a year. The workshop was everything he dreamed of but never dared hope for. Spacious, well-lit, equipped with tools he'd only seen in magazines. But more than the physical space, it was the sense of purpose that transformed him. He wasn't just hiding from life anymore, whittling away time until death claimed him. He was creating things of beauty, pieces that would become family heirlooms, that would outlast their makers and carry forward the love embedded in their construction. Another masterpiece? Came a familiar voice from the doorway. Lucian looked up to see Ariana leaning against the frame, still wearing her scrubs from her graduate program in social work. 8 months of regular meals and honest labor had filled out her face slightly, but she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. How was school? He asked, setting down his sanding block and moving to embrace her. Good. Challenging. She melted into his arms with the ease of someone who'd found their home. Dr. Martinez said my paper on trauma recovery through meaningful work was exceptional. Apparently I had some good source material. Lucian chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They were taking things slow, just as he had insisted. Ariana had her own apartment near the university, though she spent most evenings at his small house in the suburbs. They talked about everything. His guilt over the fire, her fears about living up to her father's expectations, their hopes for a future that was still taking shape. It wasn't perfect. Lucian still had nightmares sometimes, still struggled with feeling worthy of the happiness he'd found. Ariana sometimes doubted herself, wondered if she was too young, too naive, too privileged to understand the depths of his pain. But they worked through it together, building something strong and true from the ashes of their respective losses. Dad wants to know if you'll come to dinner on Sunday, Ariana said, pulling back to look at him. Annabelle's making her famous lasagna. Lucian smiled. Sunday dinners at the Ashford mansion had become a weekly tradition, though he still felt slightly out of place among the expensive art and designer furniture. But Roderick had gone out of his way to make him feel welcome, often steering conversations towards business and craftsmanship rather than topics that highlighted their different backgrounds. Tell him yes, but I'm bringing dessert this time. You don't have to. I want to. Lucian cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. Your family has given me everything. The least I can do is contribute to Sunday dinner.
That evening, as they sat on Lucian's back porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink, Ariana leaned against his shoulder and sighed contentedly. Do you ever think about that night? She asked, when we showed up at your door. Lucian wrapped his arm around her, still amazed by how perfectly she fit against him. Every day. What do you think would have happened if you hadn't opened the door? Lucian considered the question seriously. You would have found another way. You're stronger than you think you are. Maybe, but I don't think we would have found this, she gestured between them, encompassing not just their relationship, but the entire transformation of his life. I don't think I would have found you. I used to think Mom died for no reason, Ariana continued, her voice growing softer. Just random tragedy, bad luck. But now I think maybe she led us to that forest that day. Maybe she knew we'd get lost and find you. Lucian pressed another kiss to the top of her head. 8 months ago, he would have scoffed at such thinking, but he learned not to question the mysterious ways that broken people could find each other and create something beautiful from their shared pain. Maybe she did, he agreed. Do you think they would have approved? Ariana asked suddenly. Rebecca and Tommy? Do you think they would have wanted this for you? The question caught Lucian off guard. For 5 years, he'd been so consumed with guilt that he'd never considered what Rebecca would have actually wanted for him. But as he thought about it now, the answer came surprisingly clear. Rebecca used to say that love wasn't finite, that caring for new people didn't diminish what you'd felt for others. She would have wanted me to be happy, to find purpose again. And Tommy? Lucian's smile was bittersweet but genuine. Tommy would have loved you, both of you. He had this way of making friends instantly, of trusting people completely. He would have had you playing trucks in the dirt within 5 minutes of meeting you.
They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Lucian felt something he'd never thought possible after that terrible night 5 years ago. Peace. Not the empty silence of his mountain isolation, but the full, rich peace that came from being truly known and loved despite your wounds. I have something to tell you, Ariana said suddenly, her voice nervous. Lucian tensed. What? Nothing bad, she assured him quickly. It's just, I've been accepted to the doctoral program at University of Colorado. Full ride. I could stay in Denver, continue my studies here instead of moving to California like I'd originally planned. Ariana, you can't make decisions like that because of me. I'm not, she interrupted. I'm making this decision because of me, because I've found something here I didn't know I was looking for. Purpose, direction, home. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Lucian pulled her closer, overwhelmed by gratitude for this woman who'd stumbled into his life during a storm and somehow convinced him that he deserved a second chance at happiness. I love you, he said, the words coming easier than they should have. I love you too, Ariana replied without hesitation. Weeks later, Lucian and Ariana sat on their porch, since she'd officially moved in the month before. Watching the stars emerge over the mountains, Lucian felt a kind of peace he'd never experienced before. I have something for you, Ariana said suddenly, reaching into her jacket pocket. She pulled out a small wooden carving, a cabin, perfect in every detail down to the tiny chimney and front porch. You made this? Lucian asked, amazed by the craftsmanship. I've been working on it for weeks. I wanted to surprise you. She pointed to tiny figures barely visible in the cabin's windows. That's us. All of us. Even Rusty. Lucian studied the carving, noting the incredible detail, the way she'd captured not just the physical structure, but the emotional warmth of that first night when 3 strangers had become family. It's perfect, he said. Look at the base, Ariana said softly. Lucian turned the carving over and found an inscription in Ariana's careful script, where broken hearts bow to heal. October 15th, 2024. That's today's date, he said. The day we started our new chapter. Together.
Lucian set the carving carefully on the table beside them and pulled Ariana into his arms. As he held her, he thought about the journey that had brought them here, the warehouse fire that had shattered his world, the 5 years of self-imposed exile, the storm that had driven 2 lost girls to his door, the courage it had taken to open that door, to trust again, to love again. I used to think love was something you could lose, he said quietly, that if you loved someone and lost them, you'd used up your quota somehow. And now? Now, I think love is like a fire. You can bank the coals, let them go cold, convince yourself the hearth is empty. But if someone comes along with kindness, with patience, with their own warmth to offer, he paused, remembering that first night when he'd built up the fire for his unexpected guests. The smallest spark can bring it all back to life. Ariana pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I love you, Lucian Sullivan. All of you. Your past, your present, your future, your scars and your healing, and everything in between. I love you too, he replied, more than I thought I'd ever be able to love anyone again. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the mountains, not threatening this time, but promising, like rain that would make new things grow.
As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Lucian reflected on the unexpected path that had led him here. He was still broken in some ways, probably always would be. The guilt over Tommy and Rebecca would never completely disappear, and there were still nights when the nightmares came. But he was no longer alone. He had purpose again,
love again, a reason to wake up each morning and engage with the world instead of hiding from it. Most importantly, he'd learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to carry your losses with grace while remaining open to new joy. The storm that had brought Ariana and Annabelle to his door had seemed like another trial, another test of his ability to endure suffering. Instead, it had been a gift, a chance to remember that even the most damaged hearts could learn to love again. "I was thinking," Ariana said suddenly, "about maybe it's time to go back to the cabin. Not to stay, but to visit, to show you that it can be a place of good memories too, not just where you hid from the world." Lucian felt his chest tighten at the thought of returning to those mountains, but as he looked at Ariana's hopeful face, he realized she was right. The cabin didn't have to be a symbol of his isolation anymore. It could be where their story began. "Okay, let's go back," Lucian said. 2 weeks later, they stood together on the familiar porch of Lucian's mountain cabin, this time as partners rather than strangers. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of winter. "It looks smaller than I remembered," Annabelle said, arriving with Rusty and an armload of groceries for their weekend getaway. "Everything looks smaller when you're not afraid anymore," Lucian replied, unlocking the door. Inside, the cabin felt exactly the same and completely different. The furniture was unchanged, the sparse decorations exactly where he'd left them. But the weight of sadness that had pressed down on every surface was gone, replaced by something lighter: memory, gratitude, the knowledge that this place had been not just his prison, but also his salvation. "I was taught me to sand wood," Ariana said, running her fingers over the workbench where they'd spent that first afternoon together. "This is where you made that incredible pasta," Lucian said to Annabelle, who was already exploring the kitchen with proprietary familiarity. "This is where we all learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing to care for each other," Annabelle replied. That night, they built a fire and shared stories just like they had a year ago. But this time, there were no careful omissions. No secrets held back. Most importantly, they talked about the future. As the fire burned low and the others prepared for sleep, Lucian found himself standing at the same window where he'd shared his first real conversation with Ariana. But instead of staring out into stormy darkness, he was looking at a clear night sky full of stars. "Different view this time," Ariana said, joining him at the window. "Different everything," Lucian agreed. She slipped her arms around his waist from behind, and Lucian leaned back into her embrace. A year ago, he would have said this kind of happiness was impossible for someone like him, that he'd forfeited his right to joy the night he'd failed to save his son. Now he understood that love wasn't a reward for perfection. It was a gift that could bloom in the most unlikely soil, nurtured by kindness, watered by tears, strengthened by shared purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Ariana asked, her voice soft against his ear. "Storms," Lucian said. "This one? All of them. The one that brought you here, the one that took my family, the ones still coming." He turned in her arms to face her. "I used to think storms were just destruction. Now I think maybe they're necessary. Maybe they clear away what's dead so new things can grow." Ariana smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Very philosophical for a carpenter. Very wise for someone so young. We balance each other out." "Yes," Lucian agreed, leaning down to kiss her. As they stood together in the cabin where their story began, surrounded by the family they'd chosen and the love they'd built from shared brokenness, Lucian felt the final pieces of his shattered heart click back into place. He was still broken, probably always would be. The scars from that terrible night would never completely fade, but he was no longer alone with his pain. He had purpose again, love again, a reason to wake up each morning and engage with the world instead of hiding from it. Most importantly, he'd learned that healing didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant integrating it into a larger story of resilience, growth, and unexpected grace. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you of the power we all have to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Everbell Stories family.